Unit 2A, Greece Culture and Contributions. I apologize. My children are watching The Wiggles and may interrupt this lovely video of yours. So you notice these are set up a little bit different than what we have done in the past. Sometimes we like to break apart the material into smaller sections of reading. That way you can really check for understanding and not read a big long page. I promise this reading is nothing like Unit 1B, the River Valleys. It is not nearly as long. So to start us, Greece is located on the Balkan Peninsula in southern Europe. A peninsula is a piece of land surrounded by water on three sides. The bodies of water that surround Greece are the Mediterranean Sea to the south, the Ionian Sea to the west, and the Aegean Sea to the east. Greece is made up of smaller peninsulas and hundreds of islands, some small, others large. And you can see on the map, Greece is this orange area right here. You can see the water on three different sides, and you can see all these various islands. Most of the landscape was very mountainous and it required a great deal of effort to travel. Because the Greeks were surrounded by so much sea, they had an abundance or large amount of seafood. So now we're going to go to the right side and we're going to write some key details on the geography. So I would want to know that Greece is located on the Balkan Peninsula. That would be my first fact that I would want to write right here. Actually write it for you guys. That might help you. So there's my first one. I would want to know that a peninsula has water on three sides. I know there's not a ton of room right here, so you guys just might write peninsula. And you probably could put, I'm trying to shorten it for you, water on three sides. Greece is made up of, I'm just going to type this one, peninsulas and smaller islands. We're just going to put islands, thinking out loud. And then we're going to put mountainous. You could put seafood, since they were heavily dependent on the seafood. So any of those would be good answers. If you guys had other ideas about key details from that section, you absolutely could write them right there. The next section says early Greeks learned to sail and settled on areas close to the sea. However, the mountainous terrain and the poor soil quality of Greece made it difficult for farming. There simply was not enough flat and fertile land. Some of the crops they grew were grapes, olives, and barley. The seas, islands, and mountains isolated people from each other. So how did the Greeks interact with their environment to improve their lives? They used the sea for food. They adapted to their environment by learning to grow the crops they could. Some things grow well. Grapes, for instance, grow very well even on mountainous areas. So things like that were easy for them to grow based on where they would live. Now we're going to talk about city-states, and we did not actually talk a ton about city-states in our River Valley unit, but they did have city-states there too. So this is a familiar term that we will use throughout. The geography of Greece caused the people and settlements to become isolated or cut off from one another. It was difficult for people to cross the mountains and the seas. Greek settlements continued to grow over time and became city-states. The Greeks called their city-states a polis. We still use polis as a word stem in ELA classes. For example, the city where Superman is from is called Metropolis. So metro meaning a big city, and then polis meaning city-state. So how did the Greek civilization develop into city-states? It all had to do with the fact that they were isolated from others. So the people in one area came together to form a city-state. So as these isolated people settled in one area, they eventually just formed their own little city-state. Probably didn't know it at the time. Each polis developed an independent identity of its own. Each city-state had its own form of government. Each city-state had its own army and its own way of doing things. When someone asked an ancient Greek where he or she is from, they would not tell them they were from Greece. Instead, they would say the name of their city-state that they lived in. For example, someone from Sparta would say he or she was a Spartan. You were a Spartan before being Greek. Greek city-states only interacted with each other when necessary. So, what were some of the differences between our city-states? So, they were independent because they had different governments, different army, and way of we'll keep it consistent. Different ways of life. So this would be if someone asked you, where are you from? Where do you live? You would say, I'm from Myrtle Beach. And then you would refer to South Carolina. So it's like they considered their city state where they were the most proud of, where they were really part of, and then their country as a second choice. So we would say we're from Myrtle Beach rather than saying we're from the United States. We would say our small city compared to our bigger entity, wherever we are from. Okay, I'm going to scroll that down so you guys can see. However, Greek city-states also had some things in common. They were all Greek. They all worshiped the same gods and spoke the same language. They all ate similar foods, and they all made it easier for Greek city-states, which made it easy for city-states to come together when it benefited them. So some things they had in common. They had language, religion, so the gods and goddesses they worshipped, and they also had similar food. There were times when several city-states had to form an alliance, which is an agreement between two or more parties to help each other in times of need, when they had to work together to protect themselves and their independence. So an alliance is right here, an agreement between two or more parties to help each other. I think of it like a team. Groups. If I can spell it right. Work together in times of need. So when you needed help, you would form an alliance with the city-state and they would hopefully come together and help you. The next section says most city-states also shared a similar design. The urban, which is the city right in here, was typically at the center and it was surrounded by a massive wall, which you guys can see here. The rural or countryside farmland area was beyond the wall, and that was where the farms could be found. The amount of farmland beyond the city usually depended on the city-state's army and the ability to protect it from other city-states. The image shows the typical setup of a city-state. Here you go. When the city-states first developed, they were ruled by kings. So urban means our city. Rural is our countryside / farmland. Now we're going to talk about a tyrant. A tyrant is someone who seizes power and rules with total authority. Once control came back to the individual city-states, many of the tyrants commanded them fairly. However, some of the tyrants ruled hard and unjustly, causing even more unrest and the want for better ways to govern. So a tyrant is someone who takes over using force total authority, total control over it. They can do whatever they want, and no one can really tell them anything else. Another form of government we're going to talk about in the next section says, since each city-state was independent of the other, and because each city-state's people had different ideas about government, there became multiple forms of government controlling the city-states. Some went back to a monarchy. So it is a monarchy. That is a king or a queen. And then the last type of government we're going to talk about that we also see in Greece, it says others developed an oligarchy, ruled by a small group of people, usually wealthy landowners. Athens developed a new form of government, democracy. In a democracy, all citizens share in the running of the government. So what is democracy in your own words? Demo actually means people. And so it is a government by the people, is what they say. Basically, citizens and people have much of the decision making in ancient Greece. Sorry, I had to take a water break. So, Athens and democracy. The people of Athens placed high importance on education and philosophy. They expanded their minds and exercised their bodies. Their culture was rich, and they took great pride in being Athenian. Their ideas greatly influenced the Western civilization. If you think about where Greece is, and then you think about the United States, we are actually considered the Western civilization because we are to the west of ancient Greece. The Athenians took a direct democracy approach. This type of government meant that every citizen was expected to vote directly on what laws they lived by and how they were ruled. These ideas of freedom and rights were unique to the Athenians and are why Athens was known as the birthplace. To be considered a citizen of Athens, there were certain qualifications you had to meet. You had to be an adult male. You had to own your own land. You had to be free, so you could not have been a slave. And you had to be able to trace your roots back to Athens. So if that were the case in Myrtle Beach, I would not be allowed to vote because I am not from Myrtle Beach. I cannot trace my roots back to Myrtle Beach. So for a lot of you, that would be really hard if that were the case in Myrtle Beach. A lot of you have moved here from other places, other states, other countries, other sections of the same state. And this meant in Athens, no women could vote, no slaves could vote, no foreigners that were allowed to vote and be citizens. A direct democracy like that of Athens is different from the form of democracy we have in the United States. We do not vote directly on laws. Instead, we elect representatives to vote on laws for us. The United States is what we call a representative democracy or a republic. Hopefully you're thinking, republic, that sounds familiar. It does. We actually say into the republic for which it stands in our Pledge of Allegiance every morning at school. So that is where that comes from. So in this question, I want you to compare Athenian democracy to the American democracy. So if you think about, and I believe mine has 3 bullet points that I'm supposed to be writing. There's my third. So both have citizens and voting. Both of those concepts are in both types of democracy. But a difference, Athens democracy had strict rules about who was a citizen. So Athens, for example, no women is an example. I should do a sad face there. That's sad. And then the third fact, you can do Athens was a direct democracy. In the US, we are a representative democracy. Or, yes, buddy. Ethan's interested in this democracy. So hopefully that makes sense to you. If you guys have any questions, just let me or your teacher know. Mommy! Yes, buddy. You gonna say hi to everybody? Can you say hi? Hi. That's Ethan.